I'm Amelia Hayes, and I turned 40 this year with more peace and clarity than I ever thought possible. It had taken me years, decades really, to distance myself from the kind of family drama most people wouldn't believe unless they lived it. But this last Christmas, it wasn't just petty or disappointing, it was war. You see, I wasn't invited to the family Christmas for the second year in a row. Not a mistake, not an oversight, a conscious decision. No card, no call, no maybe next time. Just radio silence from every last one of them. I should have been used to it by now. I'd stopped showing up to their guilt trips and manipulation long ago, but still it stung. Christmas used to mean something, before I learned that unconditional love in my family came with 100 conditions and a $52,000 invoice. Yes, you read that right. On Christmas morning, while others opened gifts or carved roast beef, I opened an email from my younger sister Charlotte. Attached to it was a scanned bill $52,340.67 to be exact for the full cost of her new luxury car. The subject line read, "Since you missed Christmas again, you can at least help your sister." There was no hello, no hope you're well, no signature. Just an amount due and a deadline. At first I laughed, like real handover. My stomach laughter, because it was so on brand for Charlotte, and so absolutely detached from reality. A decade younger, eternally spoiled, and firmly convinced that the world owed her everything. But the laughter didn't last long. Underneath it, a bitter ache started to form. Not because of the money, I'd been financially independent since my late 20s, but because the message wasn't just coming from her. It was from all of them, from my parents who enabled her, from my brother who stayed quiet in every injustice, from aunts, uncles, cousins who watched it happen and said nothing. This wasn't a request for help. It was a final attempt to reduce me back to the family ATM. The backstory: Charlotte had totaled her previous car in an accident she caused. Texting while driving, speeding, no seatbelt. She came out of it with nothing more than a bruised ego, but of course, it was everyone else's fault. And within weeks she was driving top, tier brands like nothing happened. My parents co-signed, my uncle fronted a chunk of the down payment, and apparently, they expected me to just sweep in and cover the rest. The assumption was enraging, and yet, so typical. I hadn't always been the black sheep. I was the golden child once, until I started making my own decisions. I didn't marry the man my parents wanted. I didn't stay in our hometown. I didn't take over the family accounting business. I followed my passion for architecture, moved to Seattle, and built my own firm from the ground up. Now, after 20 years of hard work, I had a team of 12, designed award-winning spaces, and owned a penthouse downtown. But none of it ever seemed to matter to them. In their eyes, I had walked away from the family, and that made me selfish. But what do you call a family who can disinvite you from a holiday gathering while simultaneously billing you 5 figures for someone else's mistake? I stared at the invoice again, heart pounding, not out of fear but resolve. This was not just a rejection. It was a test, and I knew exactly how I wanted to answer it. Not with a fight, not with a deposit, but with something they never expected. A public, undeniable, and incredibly calculated response. You see, Charlotte's new car, it had a vanity plate, a custom one, paid for by yours truly, though not in the way she'd hoped. The dealership she used had posted a delivery photo on their Instagram page. There she was, grinning with keys in hand, captioned, "Congratulations, Charlotte, on your new ride." It took me 5 minutes to call the dealership and 20 to confirm what I suspected. Her car wasn't paid off. Not even close. And this is where the plan started to form. Because if there's one thing I've learned in business, it's that silence only empowers the loudest voice. And in my family, Charlotte had always been the loudest. It was time they heard mine. So let me ask you this. What would you do if your family treated you like a piggy bank, but excluded you like a stranger? Would you pay the price to keep peace, or make them pay attention? Drop your answer in the comments. And don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more tales of revenge served smart, not spiteful. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about Charlotte or even the outrageous $52,000 invoice. It was about the years of small humiliations that added up to one undeniable truth. My family only saw me as valuable when I was useful, not loved, not cherished, just useful. I can't remember the last time any of them asked how I was doing unless it somehow involved needing something. And while I'd long stopped expecting affection, I had held on to a quiet hope that maybe one day they'd see me for more than what I could give. But that email was the final nail. I was done hoping, and I was certainly done paying. I didn't reply to Charlotte. I didn't call my parents. I didn't rage on social media or send a strongly worded message that would have given them what they wanted, an emotional reaction. No, I chose strategy over spite. After all, I didn't build $1 million architecture firm by flailing when things got personal. I got ahead by thinking ahead, and I had a better idea. A few months earlier, I had been invited by the city to sponsor a local design competition. High school seniors across the county had entered their architecture portfolios, and the winner would receive a scholarship and a summer internship with a firm of their choice. I'd agreed instantly. It reminded me of where I started, designing little dream homes in the margins of my math books. But now, I saw a chance to use that event in a very different way. You see, the award dinner for the winner was scheduled the week after Christmas, and it was a semi-formal event. There would be press, city officials, and local business owners, all gathered in a luxury banquet hall. I'd designed myself. I reached out to the organizer and offered to cover the cost of the catering and venue on one condition: that the host recognize my sponsorship and allow me to speak briefly during the event. They agreed within minutes. Why is that important? Because my entire extended family, including Charlotte, was going to be there. My parents had donated a small amount to the community scholarship and were invited. Charlotte was tagging along with our cousin, and my brother was part of the school board. I wasn't supposed to be part of the family of this holiday season, but they'd unknowingly RSVP'd to an event where I would take center stage, and they'd have no idea until I walked in. That night, I wore a simple navy jumpsuit, my company's logo subtly stitched near the collar. I didn't arrive in a limo or try to make a grand entrance. I walked in quietly, signed in, and greeted the hosts. When I stepped into the banquet hall, it took a moment, but I saw their faces change one by one. First my brother, who blinked in surprise, then Charlotte, whose champagne glass tilted slightly in her hand, and finally my parents, my mother whispering to my father with eyes wide as I moved toward the stage. I didn't look at them. I smiled at the students, shook hands with the faculty, and waited until the microphone was handed to me. The room quieted as the host introduced me not just as a sponsor, but as a past recipient of the very same scholarship, back when it was in its first year. A full circle moment, and then I spoke, "Good evening," I said, scanning the faces in the crowd, noting how some of them avoided my gaze. When I was 17, I was told not to pursue design. I was told it wasn't practical, that it would never pay the bills, that I should stay close to home and choose a stable path. I didn't listen, and today, I don't say that out of pride, but to offer proof. Proof that belief in yourself is louder than doubt, even when the doubt comes from the people who are supposed to believe in you most. I paused. The room was silent. I let the words settle. I wasn't invited to my family's Christmas dinner this year, I said, watching a few eyebrows raise. But I was invited here, and that means more than I can say, because tonight I'm not someone's daughter, sister, or cousin. I'm a mentor, a professional, a woman who built something from nothing, and no one can take that from me, not even those who try. There it was, subtle, pointed, and sharp as glass. I stepped back from the mic to a round of applause. Not a standing ovation, but enough to show me that I wasn't invisible, that my story resonated, and more importantly, that I didn't need their table to have a seat of my own. Later during dinner, Charlotte actually approached me. Her expression was tight, but her tone tried to be breezy. "Didn't know you were gonna be here," she said, twirling her hair like she always did when nervous. That speech was intense. I sipped my water before answering. Wasn't meant to be, just honest. About the car, she began. I cut her off with a raised hand. Let's not. You made your choice, and I made mine. That invoice. I filed it, under comedy. Her mouth fell open slightly, and for the first time in forever, she didn't have a comeback. When I left that night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. I realized that winning isn't about making others feel small. It's about walking tall, even when others try to cut you down, especially then. And as I drove home, past neighborhoods filled with Christmas lights and the kind of warmth I once craved, I knew something for certain. They may have shut me out of their holiday, but I'd reclaimed something far better, my story. I stood at the window of my apartment, watching the snow drift down over the city like a quiet judgment. The Christmas lights blinked cheerily on neighboring balconies, but they only made my own space feel more silent, more excluded. It had been 3 days since the envelope arrived. No card, no holiday wishes. Just a typed invoice, $52,000 for a 2021 BMW repair. A single sticky note had been slapped onto it like a ban, date on a bullet wound. Since you didn't pitch in for Christmas this year, consider this your contribution. Mom, 40 years old, and my own mother had reduced me to a checkbook. Not a son, not even a brother, just a walking balance sheet they pulled out when needed. The bitterness wasn't new, but the sheer boldness of this insult dug deeper than usual. I had already known I wasn't welcome at Christmas this year. No call, no invite, not even a vague hope you're well text. They had gathered without me, smiled without me, and carved a turkey with my name not spoken once. And then they had the audacity to send me a bill, as if I was some absentee relative, rather than a man who'd paid off his sister's first car loan, helped his brother's kid get into a private school, and once wired his parents $10,000 when they had a plumbing emergency. I poured myself a cup of coffee that had long gone cold and sat down at the kitchen counter. My phone buzzed, lighting up with a message from my friend Tara. Still can't believe they did that. Are you okay? I typed and deleted my response 3 times before landing on, I'm done being their ATM. But even as I sent it, I knew that wasn't enough. I was beyond tired of being treated like I didn't matter unless they needed something. It wasn't just the bill. It was the years of manipulation, the one-sided loyalty, the way they always expected me to be grateful just to be included. On the fringe, I built a life for myself. Without them, I was the founder and CEO of a niche luxury logistics company that catered to international art and antique dealers. We moved priceless objects across continents, and I was damn good at what I did. But to my family, I was just Jeremy who works with boxes. That's what my sister Stacy had once told a friend at a party, and yet here they were, sending me 5-figure invoices like I was a piggy bank with no feelings. That night, I pulled out the folder I kept tucked at the back of my desk. Inside were emails, texts, and bank receipt, years of financial favors, temporary loans never repaid, and snide messages saved in moments of hurt. One from my mother, "You're just lucky you don't have kids. Imagine how hard real life is." Another from my father, "Your sister needs the help more than you. Stop being selfish." Selfish. I had bought my parents a new HVAC system when theirs failed. I had paid Stacy's rent when she was between jobs for over a year. My mistake wasn't being selfish. It was not having boundaries. The idea sparked like a match. Maybe it was time to set a new boundary they couldn't ignore. I wasn't going to pay that bill, not a dime, but I also wasn't going to disappear into silence again. I was going to respond in a way they would never forget. By the next morning, my plan had begun to take form. I called my legal advisor, Benjamin, and asked him to dig into a few property deeds I still held jointly with my parents. Things I'd signed years ago to help them secure lower mortgage rates or access better credit. Then I reached out to a financial forensic expert I knew from work, someone who had once testified in court about hidden assets during a high-profile divorce case. I wanted to make sure that if this turned ugly, I had more than just emotion on my side. But this wasn't revenge for the sake of revenge. It was clarity. I needed them to see me, not as a wallet, not as the afterthought sibling, but as a man who could no longer be controlled by guilt and obligation. I didn't want apologies. I wanted recognition. 2 days later, I showed up unannounced at my parents' home. The look on my mother's face when she opened the door was one of forced hospitality, the kind you reserve for a neighbor you barely tolerate. "Jeremy," she said, "we weren't expecting you. I noticed." I replied coolly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. My father emerged from the living room, his expression unreadable. "Something wrong." "I received your invoice," I said, holding up a crisp printout of the bill they had sent. My mother crossed her arms. "Well, we assumed since you didn't bother to come for Christmas, you'd at least help cover Stacy's situation. She was devastated after the accident. And what does that have to do with me?" I asked calmly. "She's your sister." My father barked, "And I'm your son." I shot back, "But apparently that only counts when you're short on cash." There was a stunned silence. I could see the walls of defensiveness rising in both their faces, but I didn't back down. "For years, I've helped this family. Financially, emotionally, practically. And the one time I set a boundary, you respond by excluding me from Christmas and sending me a bill." My mother looked away. My father remained stiff. "I came here to say I'm not paying a cent." I continued, "Not just for this, but for anything else moving forward. No more bailouts. No more gifts disguised as expectations. You want to treat me like a bank? Then consider this a closed account." My mother's eyes narrowed. "You're being dramatic." "No, I'm finally being honest," I said. Then I reached into my coat pocket and handed them a copy of a document Benjamin had prepared, a notice of my intent to remove my name from all jointly held assets, effective immediately. "You're on your own now, financially, emotionally, entirely." My father looked down at the paper, his jaw tight. "You'd really do this?" "I already have," I said. They didn't stop me as I left. In the car, I exhaled deeply. Not relief, not quite yet, but something close, a new beginning. The days that followed my confrontation with my parents were eerily quiet. There were no phone calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive email pretending nothing had happened. It was as if I'd been erased, but rather than feeling sorrow, I felt something else begin to take root: power. It wasn't vengeance or spite. It was the strength of finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of being guilt, tripped, manipulated, and used as a fallback option for everyone else's problems. I had drawn a line. And now I had to build from it. That week, I returned to work more focused than I'd been in months. My company had been growing steadily, but I had always held back a little, thinking I needed to leave space for family emergencies. I realized how much I'd stalled my own ambitions, worrying that if I succeeded too loudly, my family would come calling with even bigger expectations. But now that the financial umbilical cord had been cut, by me, I felt unleashed. I scheduled meetings with our CFO to discuss our next expansion plan and met with 2 venture capital firms that had shown interest months ago. While I'd previously hesitated to take on outside partners, worried they might judge my low-profile approach, I now leaned in with a confidence I didn't know I had. And it paid off. Within 10 days, we secured a preliminary funding offer of $3 million for our European expansion. I should have been celebrating, and in a way I was, but beneath the surface, the emotional fallout from my family still simmered. I'd started therapy again, not out of crisis, but out of necessity, because no matter how strong I pretended to be, their absence echoed louder than expected. When you've spent 4 decades trying to earn your place in a family that always made you feel optional, the silence that comes after finally walking away can sound like thunder. My therapist, a sharp but kind woman named Dina, looked me square in the eye one session and asked, "Why do you think they felt entitled to your money in the first place?" I didn't answer right away. I'd never really asked myself that, because they think I owe them. I finally said, for not being like them, for not needing them. She nodded, but needing someone isn't a debt. It's a relationship, and relationships go both ways. That thought stuck with me for days. I'd always believed that being successful meant giving back, especially to your family. But what if that giving was never respected, only expected? That wasn't love. That was extortion dressed in holiday sweaters and fake smiles. One evening, about 2 weeks after the Christmas incident, I got a call from my niece, Avum, my brother Kevin's daughter. She was 17 and had always been the one person in the family who treated me like I mattered beyond my bank account. Uncle Jeremy, she whispered into the phone, they're saying you cut everyone off. Is it true? I hesitated. Yes, it's true. I'm done being used. There was a pause, then her voice broke. They're saying you're selfish, that you abandoned the family. I sighed. Ava, I didn't abandon anyone. I just stopped letting them take advantage of me. Another pause, then she said something that almost brought me to tears. I'm proud of you. I wish I could do that too. We talked for over an hour. She told me how Stacy, the same sister whose car bill had been sent to me, had started mocking Ava for not wanting to join the family business, how my mother was pressuring her to become useful, like her cousins. They're trying to mold me into someone I'm not, she said. But I want to be an illustrator. I already got into an art program in Chicago, but no one's happy about it. That conversation cemented something for me. This wasn't just about me anymore. My family's toxicity was generational, and if I didn't draw this line, kids like Ava would keep getting swallowed by it. So I did something I hadn't planned on. I offered to pay for Ava's art program, completely, with no strings attached, but only if you want it. I told her, not if anyone else is pushing you toward or away from it. She cried when I said that, not because of the money, but because I was the only one who'd asked her what she wanted. Meanwhile, the rest of the family had begun their own version of damage control. I started hearing whispers through mutual contacts. Kevin had told a cousin I was having a mental breakdown. Stacy claimed I was trying to tear the family apart. And my mother. She told a neighbor that I had always been too sensitive for the real world. It was comical, in a way, how quickly their narrative had turned me into the villain. But then came the shock. One Thursday afternoon, I received a call from my company's HR department. Jeremy, my HR director, said carefully, "You might want to come down to the lobby. There's a man here claiming to be your father. He says it's urgent." I nearly dropped my coffee. When I got downstairs, there he was, my father, standing stiffly in a coat far too light for the winter chill, holding the infamous $52,000 invoice in his hand. "Jeremy," he said, his voice firm, "we need to talk." He followed me into a conference room, glancing at the modern art on the walls like it was part of a world he'd never bothered to understand. When the door closed, he didn't sit. He just stood there, shaking his head. "This isn't how family handles things," he said. "No," I replied. "This is how I handle being treated like I'm not family." He launched into a speech about loyalty, about tradition, about how money was just a tool to help each other. But when I asked him who had helped me, when I was broke in my 20s, when I was depressed after a failed engagement, when I was living on ramen and pride, he had no answer. "I'm not trying to punish you," I said finally. "I'm trying to protect myself. You'll regret this someday." He muttered, "No." I said quietly, "I regret not doing it sooner." He left without saying goodbye, but as I sat back down at my desk, the weight I'd carried for decades lifted a little more. This was no longer a rebellion. This was a reclamation of my time, of my peace, of my worth. The silence after my father walked out of the office was more telling than his words. There had been no hug, no handshake, not even the look of a man who believed what he was saying. Just a sense of obligation and the last gasp of authority from someone who realized he had no control over me anymore. I sat at my desk, hands clasped, staring at the door he'd walked out of as if expecting it to swing back open. It didn't, and that, more than anything, cemented the truth that the chapter with my family, at least the one where I played the obedient role, was finally over. But in life, endings often disguise themselves as beginnings. While my family shut doors, others began to open. My company's expansion plans took off faster than projected. One of the venture firms I'd spoken to weeks earlier came through with an aggressive offer that valued our company twice as high as we anticipated. I found myself not just in meetings with investors, but on panels at tech conferences, invited to speak about leadership, resilience, and scaling sustainably. For the first time in my life, people were listening to me not because of my last name or because I was someone's brother or son, but because I had something to say that mattered. Still, no amount of success could fully mute the ache inside me. That's the thing no one tells you when you cut ties with toxic family. Freedom comes with grief. You don't just lose bad people, you lose the fantasy of the family you always hoped would show up. The imaginary version of Christmas mornings filled with warmth, not manipulation. Birthday dinners where they celebrated you, not the chance to shame you for not bringing a gift expensive enough. It was like mourning someone who was still alive. One night, a friend invited me to a New Year's Eve party. I almost declined. I wasn't in the mood for celebration or small talk. But something told me to go, to be around people who saw me, not my bank account. The rooftop bar overlooked the city skyline, and as the countdown to midnight began, I looked around at strangers laughing, friends clinking glasses, and lovers embracing, and for once, I didn't feel out of place. I felt still at peace, like I didn't need to perform or prove or purchase affection. As the fireworks exploded across the sky, I silently whispered, "This year I choose me," but life wasn't quite done testing that declaration. The first test came a week later. I received a notice in the mail, an actual formal letter, sent from my parents' attorney. Inside was a petition of restitution, stating that they had incurred emotional damages and financial hardship due to the $52,000 I had withheld from family obligations. It read like a parody, except it was real. They were threatening to sue me, not because they believed they could win, but because they wanted to rattle me, to drag me back into their chaos, to punish me for saying no. I stared at the letter for a long time. Old me would have called immediately, offered to talk it out, maybe even paid just to make it go away, but not this time. Instead, I forwarded the letter to my attorney and instructed him to respond firmly. There is no legal obligation to finance family members. My client rejects all claims and will seek damages if harassment continues. I signed the bottom with a confidence that surprised even me. The second test came through Ava. My niece had been quiet for a few days, and when I finally got her on the phone, she sounded shaken. "Uncle Jeremy," she said softly, "they're trying to pull me out of art school. They said if I don't change majors, they won't let me live at home anymore." I felt rage rise in my throat. "Are you safe?" "Yes," she whispered, but scared. Without hesitation, I wired her money for 6 months' rent and connected her with a colleague in Chicago who had an extra room. "You don't owe me anything," I told her. "Just promise me you'll keep being brave." She cried, "You're the only one who sees me." That sentence broke me, because I had spent most of my life just wanting someone to see me too. But the final test was the most unexpected. I received an invitation, an actual engraved card, to a family reconciliation dinner, hosted by my sister Stacy. It was scheduled for the same weekend as our city's Entrepreneur Awards Gala, where I'd recently been nominated as Innovator of the Year. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family wanted a reunion at the exact time the outside world was preparing to honor me for the very independence they had tried to suppress. I debated whether to go. Was it genuine? A trap, a performance? Ultimately, I decided not to attend. I chose the gala, not because I needed the applause, but because I refused to let my family's dysfunction dim a moment I had earned. I arrived in a sleek navy tuxedo, my name etched on a placard at the front table, and was greeted by colleagues, press, and even a few of my former investors. It wasn't ego. It was acknowledgement. For years, I'd been the guy who stayed quiet, who gave in, who picked up everyone else's emotional and financial tabs. But that night, I wasn't just seen, I was celebrated. When they announced my name and I stepped onto that stage, I didn't speak about profits or growth. I spoke about worth, about how hard it is to value yourself when the people who raised you only see you as a wallet. I said sometimes, The most radical thing you can do is walk away from people who pretend to love you but only really love what you give them. The audience stood. I didn't cry not then, but when I stepped off stage and saw Ava in the crowd, smiling through her tears, I knew the shift was complete. I hadn't lost a family. I'd chosen myself. The new year brought a fresh kind of peace, a stillness I hadn't known in decades. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up dreading a message from my parents, a phone call laced with passive aggression, or another fabricated emergency tied to my bank account. It was strange how silence, the same thing they used to punish me with growing up, now felt like a gift. There were no holiday invitations, no manipulative guilt trips, no staged interventions about how I was breaking the family. Just the quiet hum of a life finally being lived on my terms. But even in that peace, there was unfinished business. I hadn't addressed the bill, the ridiculous, laughable, insulting $52,000 invoice they sent me weeks before Christmas for my sister's Range Rover birthday surprise. It had come in a sleek, professional envelope with a printed letter, like some corporate notice. They didn't even have the courage to handwrite the demand, and while I'd emotionally moved on, I knew legally and symbolically I needed to close that chapter with clarity, so I asked my lawyer to draft a formal response. Not out of anger, but principle, we mailed a 2-page letter back to my parents. In it, my attorney politely yet firmly outlined the absurdity of the claim. He included screenshots and copies of prior messages, texts from my mother stating I was not welcome this year for Christmas because I always made things awkward. He even attached a list of financial contributions I had made over the years, covering my sister's college apartment deposit, a down payment for my dad's back surgery that insurance didn't cover, and the thousands I had wired silently to cover family emergencies that were never repaid. The final line of the letter reads simply, "My client does not owe your family anything, not legally, not financially, and certainly not morally." A week passed, then 2, no response, no threats, no apology. Just silence, and this time I didn't chase it. Instead, I focused on the life I had built. The one they never asked about, never supported, and frankly, never believed I was capable of creating. I had a gallery opening in New York that month, a curated art tech installation designed to make fine art accessible through digital storytelling. It was one of our startup's latest initiatives, and it had received more attention than we'd imagined. Press, bloggers, local schools, even museum curators were coming to see how we were bringing the fine arts to underfunded schools and digital classrooms. On the night of the launch, I stood by the entrance, watching the room fill with people from all walks of life. Former classmates, mentors, strangers who had followed my work online, but the person who caught my eye the most, Ava, my niece, she wore a bold red coat, the kind my mother would have said was too loud. Her hair was curly and unapologetic, her smile radiant. She walked in with a group of friends, all art students, all clearly awed by the exhibit. She caught sight of me and beamed, rushing forward. "Uncle Jeremy," she said, hugging me tightly. I couldn't stop the grin that spread across my face. "You came? Are you kidding? I've told everyone about this," she said. "I even used your work as part of my final essay on accessible art." For a moment, I just stared at her, pride swelling in my chest. "I'm proud of you," I said. She squeezed my hand. "That makes 2 of us." We wandered through the exhibit together. She asked deep, thoughtful questions, pointing out nuances in the digital pieces that even I hadn't fully appreciated. Watching her eyes light up with wonder and analysis reminded me of myself at that age, the version of me that hadn't yet been worn down by shame and guilt. "I want to curate one of these someday," she said. "Like help tell stories that matter, not just the perfect, polished ones." "You will," I said without hesitation, "and when you do, people will remember how it made them feel. That's what lasts." Toward the end of the evening, while posing for a press photo, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned and was genuinely stunned. My grandmother, Ruth, she stood there in her long, gray coat, hands clasped, eyes watery. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said softly. "I wasn't sure you knew about it," I replied. She smiled, gentle and sad. I've always known more than I let on. That night, we sat down for the first real conversation we'd had in over 10 years. She told me things I never expected to hear, about how she had watched the family dynamics twist over the years, how she regretted not stepping in sooner, how she saw too much of herself in my mother, and didn't know how to stop the cycle. I always thought silence protected people, she said, staring at her tea, but now I know silence is just another mask. Her words reminded me of something my therapist once said: what we don't repair, we repeat. We spoke for nearly 2 hours. At one point, I looked around the room, the art, the laughter, the creativity pulsing through every wall, and realized that this was the family I had longed for, not defined by blood but by understanding, not by tradition but by truth. I didn't need my parents to validate me anymore. I didn't need them to acknowledge their wrongdoing or pay back the money or even apologize. Because in that moment, surrounded by people who saw me clearly, I finally understood. I wasn't waiting to be invited to the table anymore. I had built my own. In the weeks that followed the gallery's success, something changed in me, not just in how I looked at my family, but how I looked at myself. I had spent so many years seeking validation from the very people who constantly made me feel small. Now, standing in the fullness of everything I had built, I no longer felt the need to explain myself. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was finally free. That clarity didn't come all at once. It crept in gradually, like morning light softening the edges of a dark room. I began noticing how much of my life had been shaped by avoidance, second guessing, and people pleasing. I used to think that being the responsible one meant constantly cleaning up the messes of others, emotionally and financially. But all it really meant was that I had been conditioned to believe my value only existed in sacrifice. And now, I wasn't willing to sacrifice myself anymore. When my accountant called me mid-February to go over my quarterly earnings, he paused midway through and said, "You know, I don't say this to clients often, but congratulations, you turned your vision into something incredible." I thanked him, but his words lingered. Because it wasn't just about the revenue or partnerships. It was about the fact that I had built all of it despite the people who were supposed to believe in me, but didn't. Still, as much as I was moving forward, one thing remained unresolved: the silence from my parents. They hadn't responded to the lawyer's letter. They hadn't tried to follow up on the bill. They hadn't even texted to pretend everything was fine, as they'd often done after a confrontation. And yet, their absence hung in the air like a ghost. Not because I missed them, but because it felt like unfinished business. That clarity came unexpectedly, during an event I hadn't planned to attend. My niece Ava texted me, asking if I would come to her senior showcase at her art school. "It would mean the world to me if you were there," she'd written, so I went. It was held in a small but beautiful auditorium. The walls were lined with her class's work: paintings, sculptures, mixed media pieces, digital installations. Ava's work stood out immediately. It was bold, raw, honest. And then, as I approached one particular display, I saw the title, Inherited Silence. The piece was a series of 3 canvases. The first depicted a dinner table with an empty chair, the second showed a person screaming underwater, and the third was just a mirror with a small plaque underneath that read, "Would you have heard me if I was louder?" It was jarring and deeply emotional. After the showcase, Ava found me near the refreshment table. "Did you see it?" she asked nervously. "I did," I said, my voice catching. "It was powerful." She nodded slowly. "It's about our family, about you, really." I looked at her, surprised. "I remember all those times you weren't at Christmas," she said, and I didn't understand why. "Mom and Grandma would say you were busy or too successful to be bothered. But I always knew that wasn't the full story. You were just a kid," I said, shaking my head. "You shouldn't have had to carry any of that, but I did," she said softly. "We all did. Except I think you were the only one brave enough to stop pretending." I couldn't respond right away. Her words hit deeper than she knew. She then handed me an envelope. "Grandma came to my studio last week. She gave me this, said it was for you." Inside was a handwritten letter from my mother. In it, she didn't apologize, not directly. But she acknowledged things in a way she never had before. She admitted that when she saw the success of the gallery opening on TV, she cried, not because she was proud, but because she realized how little she knew about the person I had become. She wrote about feeling left behind, irrelevant. She said they sent that bill not because they thought I owed them, but because they resented that I no longer did. And finally, she admitted the truth I had waited years to hear. "We treated you like a bank," she wrote, "a bottomless reserve of support, money, and emotional stability. We never asked if you were okay, and worse, we never thought we needed to." The letter ended without a promise of change. But it was honest, and it was something. I folded the letter and handed it back to Ava. "You keep it." I said, "Maybe someday it'll help you understand how far you've come." In the weeks that followed, I kept living. My company expanded to 2 more cities. We landed a European partnership that opened doors in Paris, Berlin, and Stockholm. I started mentoring young artists and entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds. I even began a small podcast, just a quiet space to talk about boundaries, healing, and the complicated dynamics of family and ambition. And slowly, something shifted in the universe. Aunt Linda, yes, that Aunt Linda left a comment on one of my podcast episodes. "I never realized how much you were carrying back then. Thank you for teaching the rest of us how to listen." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed to. They would watch from afar. They would see the life they tried to silence take up space on stages, in galleries, on headlines they didn't expect. And that was enough. The final piece of closure came unexpectedly. Ava invited me to her graduation dinner. It was the same kind of occasion I had once been excluded from tables of family, toasts, laughter, pictures with grandparents. I walked in that evening, expecting to blend into the background. But when it came time for Ava to give her thank you speech, she tapped her glass and said, "I want to thank someone who taught me what real love looks like. Not the kind that buys cars or pays bills, but the kind that sees you for who you are and cheers you on anyway. Uncle Jeremy, this one's for you." The room went silent. Every eye turned to me. I stood, unsure what to do. But then Ava raised her glass and everyone followed, even my mother, and for once, just once, I saw no resentment in her eyes. Only recognition. I raised my glass, nodded, and sat down. Not as their wallet, not as their scapegoat, but as myself, and that was everything. Sometimes the people closest to you will demand everything and offer nothing. They'll build narratives where your success is selfish, where your silence is betrayal, and where your distance is ingratitude. But more often than not, those narratives say more about their own insecurities than your worth. I spent a lifetime trying to earn a seat at a table that was never truly mine. I bent, I accommodated, and I gave far more than I ever received. But somewhere between their silence and my breakthrough, I learned the most important lesson of all. The power to stop explaining yourself is the power to finally live on your own terms. When my family didn't invite me to Christmas and instead sent me a $52,000 bill for my sister's luxury car, they weren't just excluding me. They were trying to put a price tag on my worth. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. It was about reminding me that no matter how far I had come, they still saw me as the one who owed them. But what they failed to see was how much I had grown in the shadows of that expectation. I used to think loyalty meant always showing up, always fixing, always absorbing the blows so no one else had to. But real loyalty doesn't mean destroying yourself for people who won't meet you halfway. Real loyalty is reciprocal. It's built on respect, not obligation, on care, not convenience. I looked back often in those early days, wondering if I'd gone too far by drawing a line, by sending that letter, by refusing to stay silent or complicit. But the more I stood in my own truth, the more I realized I had only just begun to live. I started choosing peace over performance. I started nurturing friendships that didn't feel transactional. I started building a life that didn't require constant explanation, where love wasn't tested by how much I was willing to lose to keep it, and that changed everything. Boundaries saved me, Not the harsh kind drawn in anger, but the kind made from self-respect. I stopped picking up calls that left me depleted. I stopped attending gatherings where I was only tolerated, not celebrated. I stopped pretending I didn't notice when love came with strings attached. And in doing so, I made room for the kind of life I had always dreamed of, one filled with creativity, fulfillment, and yes, even joy. One of the most beautiful surprises came from Ava. She became the mirror I didn't know I needed. Through her eyes, I saw the ripple effect of one person choosing truth over tradition. She didn't need me to fund her future. She needed me to model what it looked like to build your own. In every speech I gave afterward, I always included one line: "You don't owe your past more than you owe your future." Because it's true, family can be sacred, but it should never be a cage. You're allowed to evolve past their version of you. You're allowed to outgrow their stories even if they wrote them with your name. Forgiveness, when it came, wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a big reunion or a tearful apology. It was quiet. It was a soft release in my own chest. I forgave them for not knowing better. I forgave myself for thinking I had to wait for their permission to rise. Healing isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about restoration, the gentle rebuilding of who you are when no one is watching. And once I stopped needing them to change, I found the strength to change everything for myself. The irony is, my family now tells the story differently. In their version, they were always supportive. They remember things more kindly, less sharply, and I let them, because some battles aren't worth fighting. The truth doesn't need constant defending. It just needs to be lived, and I live it every day. In the gallery walls I curate, in the letters I get from strangers saying my story helped them leave a toxic dynamic, in the mirror I face each morning unburdened, I'm no longer the girl begging for a place at the table. I built my own, and here's the thing I want everyone to know. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not wrong for saying no. You are not heartless for not picking up the phone when it's only ever been used to guilt you. You are allowed to protect your energy. You are allowed to rewrite the story. You are allowed to become someone your past would never recognize, someone your younger self would be proud of. So if you're watching this because your family made you feel small, unseen, or disposable, hear me now. You are not alone, and you are not crazy. You're just awakening, and what comes next may hurt for a while, but eventually it will heal you in ways you can't yet imagine. What they took from you doesn't compare to what you'll reclaim once you decide you're done performing. I once got a bill for $52,000 as a punishment for not showing up. Now I get paid twice that to speak on stages about boundaries and resilience. And if that isn't poetic justice, I don't know what is.